Ammar Kahif. He's the Executive Director of the Omran Centre for Strategic Studies, and he's joining us from Istanbul. Ammar, always good to have you on the show, sir. So we heard there from Sarah about the resolve of the people in northern Syria to continue the fight, but this war has dragged on for so long and it doesn't seem to have an ending in sight. There are renewed efforts. Where do you place those efforts at the moment to bring an end to that war?
Thank you very much for this excellent coverage on the 10th anniversary. I honestly don't see much on a holistic approach to the crisis. No one is actually dealing with the root causes of the problem, which is the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Each country is, international allies are trying to freeze certain zones to create safe areas for the humanitarian situation, which is very well appreciated, obviously, but does not really deal with the overall aspect of creating a sustainable peace process. So far, the peace process is stalled, and there has been attempts by many countries, including Turkey, to push the process forward, but in the meantime, to alleviate some of the suffering of the Syrian people by freezing the conflict in certain zones. And unfortunately, there has been some breaches the last few days in the Euphrates Shield areas by the Assad regime. So, given all that, I see that so far the Syrian people are left alone with very few partners to support them. And so a lot of these attempts have been partial, have been dealing with certain areas to freeze conflict here or there, to create arrangements for the movement and transportation of humanitarian aid. All of that is very essential, obviously, but does not deal with the big elephant of the room, which is Bashar al-Assad and his criminal regime.
And how is that regime dealt with? As you will know, Mr. Kahif, there are a number of baskets, paths, ways that the war is trying to be resolved. You've got the UN process, the Astana process. Just last week, we had Turkey, Russia and Qatar announcing a process to try and bring an end to the war. And all of these processes, in one way, want to bring humanitarian aid into the country. How does humanitarian aid get in there? And what is to be done about the regime in Damascus?
Well, so far, the international aid has not met the needs of the people on the ground in all areas of Syria. And so the international commitments have not been met the last several 10 years of the crisis. And unfortunately, some of the countries have decided to decrease its commitment to the humanitarian situation. And obviously, we know that the cross-border agreement has been limited to one border, cross-border, and a lot of people on the ground are afraid of the Russians stalling this renewal process, I believe, in the next 6 months. And so the humanitarian situation remains dire. Still, people live in camps, and 3.5 million children out of schools. And the regime has stalled humanitarian envoys from the regime areas. And so, pushing back humanitarian aid to come from the south to the north is really defeating the purpose, because as we stand today, there is humanitarian aid, a lot of humanitarian aid from the UN agencies from Damascus, but the regime has stalled the delivery of aid to the most needy areas and have benefited its networks, specifically networks that are aligned with the regime, the intelligence, and those who committed crimes against the people of Syria, to support their networks rather than the people of Syria.
And finally then, Ammar, that's the humanitarian side of it. Let's look at the political and perhaps the military side of it. There are, of course, some nations that have perhaps become resolved to the idea that Bashar al-Assad will stay in power. Of course, there are many other nations that want to see him removed. How do you see the next few months, perhaps years going? Because while those two sides exist, the war does seem intractable.
Well, every initiative is well appreciated. The initiative by Turkey and Qatar, the initiatives by other Gulf countries that may or may not come to the surface, all of those, and especially above all, the initiatives of Turkey to keep the file moving, is well appreciated, obviously. However, what we have seen recently are these arrangements, ceasefire, freezing arrangements that are basically dealing again with the immediate need to create a safe place for people to at least survive and trying to use that as leverage for the political process. Unfortunately, so far, that leverage has not been used enough, as the backers of the regime have continuously resisted to move the political process forward. What we hope is that at least there's a ceasefire, that people can rebuild their lives, that institutions can be built on the ground, that Syrian people and the capacity of Syrian people are empowered to be able to rebuild their country and be able to renegotiate these terms on better terms with the Assad regime and its backers, and be able to win the message of freedom and dignity and democracy, where all people are treated equal, where people have access to basic services and live a dignified life. That would be the true meaning of a safe environment. What we have today are pieces of safe zones that do not have aerial bombardment, but have other safety insecurities as a result of continued attacks by the regime, by some of the PYD elements also, and by, of course, ISIS above all. Or actually above all is the Assad regime, and then the rest comes as change afterwards. I see that at least we're turning into a frozen conflict, which is unfortunate, but there are obviously opportunities to that where people can prosper and rebuild their lives and be able to be better empowered for a better deal.
Well, that is the hope, that people will be able to rebuild their lives and live, as you say, with dignity. Ammar Kahif, the Executive Director of the Omran Centre for Strategic Studies, appreciate your analysis. Thanks for being with us.